Dear students, through this lecture we are going to study about methods in Java. So you usually heard about modular programming approach. What do you mean by modular programming approach is that if you are given a complex problem, you can divide that complex problem into multiple small programs, simple programs, and you can deal with each of the simple problem separately. Try to get the output of each of the simple programs or subprograms, and finally incorporate all the subprograms to form the final program. Okay, so here as an example, you are given a stadium having a shape like this, and you are asked to find the area of this particular stadium. So by clearly analyzing this picture, we came to know that it is not easy to find the area of such a shape. But if I can divide this particular shape like a semicircular portion on the left side, a semicircular portion on the right side, and a rectangular portion at the middle side, I can find the area very easily. So how I can deal with this complex problem? By using the approach known as modular programming approach or functions. I can deal this problem, or I can find the area of the stadium by dividing this particular problem into three subproblems. First one is finding the area of the rectangle, second one area of the semicircular portion, and third one meaningfully incorporating these two subprograms to form the final result. Okay, so this function, that means first module, is actually finding the area of the rectangle. It won't do any other processes. If you are giving the length and breadth of the rectangle, it will find the area of the rectangle. What the second portion is going to do is, if you are providing the radius, it will find the area of the semicircular portion. Then what this subproblem is doing is that it will incorporate this portion twice and this portion once to form the area of the stadium. So each of these subprograms or modules is known as a function, and each of this function is working independently, and these functions can be reusable. For example, in this problem I have developed the function that is finding the area of the rectangle. I can use the same function for some other problem where I need to find the area of the rectangle. Okay, so this function is reusable and this function is working independently. So this is what is known as modular programming approach and function. So each of the module is known as a function. So you have studied functions in C++. What do you mean by a function? As I said earlier, a large problem is divided into so and so many subproblems or its basic building blocks, and each of the subproblem or basic building block is known as a function. A function is doing an independent action, and what the function is going to perform is enclosed within a bracket. And this function may or may not be taking input from the external world, and it is processing the input, and it may or may not return the result to the external world. Okay, and another thing is that, as I said earlier, I can use this function in any of the applications, and in the same program also I can call this function any number of times, and the collection of these functions create a full program. Finally, the function is also known as procedure or subroutine or method. In Java, a function is known as a method. So what is a method? It is a collection of statements that perform some specific task and return the result to the caller. So what is the use of this is, it can be reusable, it can be called any number of times, and it is a part of a small class. Okay, and how it can be defined is that this is a small example that is giving the method of declaring a particular method. Now here you have the word public. You know what is the purpose of public here. It can be accessed anywhere inside the class. Then what is this return type is that the function is going to perform some action, and if it is returning a particular value, what is the type of that value? That is a return type. Then method name. Method name means what? A user defined name that is used for calling that particular function. So that method name should be meaningful. You have to give it very clearly. And what is a parameter list is that if the function is taking input from the external world, then those inputs are known as parameters. And in the definition we are using certain parameters. Those are known as actual parameters. And in the calling method you are calling some other variables that is having the same meaning as that of these variables, and those variables are known as the actual parameters. Now you have the body of the method. So a total of 5 things you have to remember while declaring a function. Another one is also there, that is known as the exception list. Exception list means if you are defining a particular problem and suppose that some exceptions are coming, it will throw that exception. So you will study about exception and throwing exception later in this module. Now what is the control flow of the function is that here you have the class, main class as the name main. Inside the main class you have the main function, and inside the main function I am calling the function my function. So what is the mode of this function? It is not having any return value and it is not taking any of the input arguments. So once this line is executed, what happens is the control will be moving inside the body of the function where it is defined, and the body of the function get executed. Since it is not returning any value, sometimes it will be printing the value, or sometimes it will be giving a simple message to the user. After the execution of this particular function body, automatically the control will be moving back to the main function, next line of the main function, and it will execute the remaining part of the main function. So this is a control flow if you are going to use a function in a particular program. So this is a syntax. I have already explained. You have a modifier, you have a return type, then you have to give a name of the function, that should be a meaningful name, then you may or may not have the parameter list, then you have the function body. For example, suppose here I have defined a function minimum that is taking 2 input arguments n1 and n2. So from the name itself it is clear that it is taking the minimum of the input values n1 and n2. So inside the function body I am checking whether n1 is greater than n2. If n1 is greater than n2, I know that minimum is n2, otherwise minimum is what? N1. So in order to store the result, I am declaring a variable min minimum inside the function body. This variable is a local variable. This cannot be accessed outside the function, but it is returning the value that is stored in the minimum variable. So upon executing this function, the minimum get returned back and the function will be returning that particular value. So this minimum is of type int, that is why the return type is stated as int. Then what is the meaning of static here? So static, you know that without the help of object you can access that particular function if you are defining that as a static function. Okay, so for example, if you are moving forward, you have an example of a function execution. Here you have the main function, inside that main class, inside that you have the main function. Inside main function I am calling minimum. So this minimum is the same function that I have explained earlier, so it will be returning the value that is stored in the variable minimum. What happens is it will be moved to here. So here what is the meaning of this line? Int c, that means I am declaring a variable c that is of type int, and it is taking the value that is output of the function minimum. Since the function is defined as static, I can call this function inside another function, that is the main function, without the help of the object. Suppose that this word static is not there. Okay, so if the word static is not there, what happens is you couldn't call this minimum directly inside the main function, because this minimum is a function that is defined inside the main class, and the main function is another function that is defined inside the main class. These two functions have no relation. If you want to relate these two functions, you have to define object corresponding to that class inside that particular function. Okay, so if you want to execute minimum function inside the main function, you have to first create the object corresponding to main class, then using that object you have to call this. So what is the difference? Here there is no static. If there is static here, you can directly call. If there is no static here, you have to call the function using with the help of an object. Okay, another concept is here both the function main and the minimum are inside a same class. Suppose that these two functions are inside different classes. So here I have the class min operator. inside the min operator class I have defined the function minimum, and another class is their main class. That is a main class because main function is defined inside the main class, and through this main function I am going to execute the minimum. What is the thing you have to do is this minimum is defined inside the class min operator. So you have to define a object corresponding to min operator inside this particular main function, and using that object you have to call this main. So what is the difference between these three? Here you have the static word, and here the minimum function is inside the same class. You can call directly. Here the static keyword is not there, but it is defined inside the same class. Since static is not there, you have to define an object, and using that object you have to execute. Here the minimum function is in another class. Here also you have to define the object corresponding to that particular class for executing that minimum inside the main function. Okay. Another thing is how we can pass the parameters. You already know parameters can be passed by value or passed by reference. Passed by value means here this is the case. If you have the original value inside the main function, if you want to modify the value of that particular variables, you have to adopt the method call by reference. Otherwise you can go for call by value. So what is the difference? If you are passing by value, you are just passing the value towards the function. There the value get modified, but that modification doesn't reflect to the variables that are defined inside the main function. But if you are passing by reference, a copy of that is defined inside the main function, defined inside the sub function. There the value is changing. The same change will get reflected in the variables that are defined inside the main function. So these two cases are possible, call by value and call by reference. But in the case of Java, we are always using pass by value method, not the pass by reference, because it is some bit difficult in Java to implement this call by reference method. Okay, so this is another example, the example of call by value. Here I have the variable a is equal to 30 and b is equal to 45. So before swapping I am printing the value of a and b, and after that I am calling the swap function. So inside the swap function I am swapping the values of a and b, and here I am printing the value of a and b. But after the execution of the function, the control will be moving to this line. Again, if I am printing the value of a and b, these two values, that means here the value will be printed as 30 and 45 itself, but here the value get printed as 45 and 30. That means here the value is swapped, but those changes will not get reflected to the main function. That is actually called by value. Okay, thank you.